So today we have a great opportunity to meet one of the candidates for the Conservative Party of Canada, Steve Schaefer. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill.
So listen, anybody that's out to vote, are they going by your good looks or do they really want to know who you are? So the good question is, who the stink is Steve Schaefer and how can he make a difference in the governance of Canada? So who's Steve Schaefer?
Well, he's a guy that's got a face for radio and a voice for print, since you mentioned it. But but who am I? I suppose we define ourselves by the things that we do. And if so, I've been a management consultant for about the past 12, 13 years. I've run my fair share of companies, so I've been used to signing the fronts and the backs of checks. And now I've also been doing political strategy work for about the last 20 odd years.
Now, to be a really good candidate to run the country, isn't elementary drama teachers high on the list for a skill set?
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, I've never actually tried running for the leader of the country. I would imagine that you would want to have a little bit better of a CV.
That was a joke, of course.
Yep.
But in all reality, what a breath of fresh air to hear someone with business skills. And for whatever you've done, I'm assuming in the private sector mostly.
Yes, indeed.
So if you can't balance the books, if you can't make a profit, the company goes broke.
Generally, yes.
So basic business principles.
Yes.
Revenue in, revenue out, expenses out. The books have to balance.
They do indeed. It's always bothered me that we've looked up to lawyers, for instance. I'm not sure why we've elevated them beyond a certain station. And we've said, well, part of the job of being a politician is to craft laws. Therefore, lawyers are ideally suited. But of course, we can outsource that to lawyers. That's just one portion of what a member of parliament would do. I think what we need, by and large, to be honest, is people who are used to sitting around boards getting good, bad, and otherwise as far as advice, and they have the requisite judgment and experience to be able to sort through the advice and to do some input, processing, and output of the right answer. We need more of those types of people.
Listen, I'm going to put it in summary a little bit, but anybody that's worked for the public sector, has no real understanding of balancing books. If they overspend next year, they just get a higher budget, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to lump every single person who works in the public sector as saying that they don't have a concept of balancing budgets. I think the problem is that there isn't the same consequence if they don't balance a budget. The problem is, as you pointed out earlier, you've got the shareholders, right? The shareholder's going to be very angry with you if you don't provide value for them in the end. But on the public side of things, the shareholders, if you will, are the taxpayers. Well, there's an unlimited supply of money there. So whether you do well or you don't, your performance is never based on, how well you're doing. You always have a guarantee of a job. That's what needs to change.
Right. No, I mean, you watch the government go into business and say, build a pipeline, right? Or anything. And their budget is, say, 4 million.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out to be 30 million. And instead of being 4 years to complete, it turns out to be 10 years, right? So I'm just saying, in the public world, they are horrible at running businesses. And I really don't think a drama teacher, elementary school credentials is enough skill set to run a business.
Yeah, and I think that's why the saying came about, we always get the government that we deserve. Right. I believe in what Ronald Reagan said, which is that government will never do anything as economically or as efficiently as the private sector. And right. I think that's very true.
Actually, you know what? Just to point that out a little bit, in the private sector, for example, we'll say private school teachers or any private business, I think it's pretty much a general accepted principle that 15% attrition every year, roughly, right? But there's the people that arrived late to work all the time. There's the people that don't upgrade their skill sets. There's the people that maybe come intoxicated to work all the time and they have to go. You look at some of the groups, and I'm going to point out to BC teachers in British Columbia, roughly 56,000 people. I don't know anybody that's been fired in 10 years, right? But in the private world, there would be a 15% house cleaning.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the figures are, but I do know that it's notoriously difficult to get rid of teachers once they're in there.
Yeah.
And I can't really speak for the BC system, but I know that both my sister and my mother were teachers, are and were teachers in the Alberta public school system. And I know that it's been odious to both of them, that they know the amount of care and attention and the hours that they're putting in. They're also making the same amount of money as the person next door that comes in late, leaves early and puts in the minimum amount of effort.
I saw an interesting word out of someone in the States. He said, democracy can turn into bureaucracy. And I'm going, well, that's an interesting concept. Democracy meant to be we vote and we have everybody come and manage our corporation, we'll call it. But when the bureaucracy bloats so much that all of a sudden it's overtaken actual democracy, right?
Yeah, and there's various reasons why it does.
Yeah.
Because if you're a government, you can only enlarge the government or your cabinet so much. And then how else do you thank all of your friends for having bundled as much money as they did for your party to be able to form government? That's one way. So you enlarge the bureaucracy. But the other problem is we have taken to evaluating how successful a given ministry is by how much money we're throwing at it, right? The Liberals always want to talk about, oh, we're going to spend an extra 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion on the CBC, whatever it is. But we're not looking at metrics by which we can say, well, are we serving all the communities that we need to? We do the same thing with health all the time. Well, how dare we have metrics based on what's the wait times? All we want to say is, well, we're throwing more billions and more tens of billions at it, therefore it's got to be getting better. That's the wrong way to look at things.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I once again am encouraged that you've got a solid foundational business management basis to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, that is essential to help running a big corporation, right? And well, that's very exciting. So, what made you get into politics, Steve?
Oh, that's an easy one. I grew up in the late 70s and early 80s when in Calgary, back in a time where we were just recovering from what this guy's father was doing to us. So we had things like wage and price controls in the 70s, and we had insane policy that resulted basically in, do you remember mortgage rates at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Early 80s? You had 24.75%, I think is where it peaked at. So we had the national energy policy in Alberta. My father and now my brother are both in oil and gas. And so when we saw and you know what the NEP was, right?
Yeah.
It was essentially the national spy agency into Alberta to see if us uppity Westerners were giving enough billions to Ottawa, right?
Yeah.
And so basically we had a situation where we'd be driving downtown in mom and dad's 76 Chevy Caprice estate wagon. And I'm sitting there from way back in the back seat. And I can hear my dad pointing out to my mom all the lights that are off on the buildings downtown. And he, and they should have been obviously on. People didn't punch out at 5 o'clock back then, right? But the problem was suddenly in this boom and bust cycle that Alberta was in, much more pronounced back then, we were heading into a pretty big bust. And so you had a boom time where people were doing well on their properties, but suddenly they're out of really well-paying jobs. They're simultaneously underwater and over-leveraged on their mortgages. And they found out that, guess what? Banks don't want your deeds. They want to get paid. Yeah. And many men's sense of self-worth was then, as now, tied to their ability to produce and provide for their families. We had a family friend amongst them who opted for suicide. And it's why I've been able to see the real world impacts that really bad policy can have on people. And since then, I've just been devouring information as much as I can. Some kids are really into hockey and, baseball cards and stats. And I would be into memorizing speeches, from Mulrooney or from the Iron Lady or from Ronald Reagan. And not just speeches, but the policy and what was the rationale behind what they were doing and why. So I guess it's been in my blood. My first campaign that I worked on was Preston Manning's. He was my MP before, and Stephen Harper, he was my MP before he was my PM. So I guess kind of in the blood.
Well, so Steve, you were right in the epicenter of the birth of the original Reform Party with Preston Manning, right in Calgary South, like you, and then Stephen Harper was also Calgary, was he, or where was he from?
Calgary Southwest.
No
Both
kidding.
of those were my MPs.
They both.
It's now called Calgary Heritage. My friend Shuv Majumdar's in there now.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you're on the ground floor for the location. That's pretty exciting. Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting. When I came out here, I had to almost apologize for having been in the Reform Party. I know that there were several out here in the West who were still very much PC people, but you got to understand, that was the zeitgeist in Calgary at the time. You could not be anything but reformer. There used to be these battles, actually, in Calgary Southwest, and it was over who could throw the largest stampede party. Right? It was the Stampede Breakfast or the Stampede Barbecue. And we would be bussing people in from the Reform Party from Fort McFrozen in the north and all the way up from Lethbridge, just so that we could have it out between Bobby Sparrow of the PCs and Preston Manning of the Reform Party. Those were incredible days.
Well, listen, once again, all gets down to, in my opinion, balanced budgets. And I mean, don't quote me, but I mean, Pierre Trudeau racked up quite a bill, if I remember right, and then the Reform Party, the Conservative Party, actually trimmed it down. If I remember, we might end up with 400 billion at some point or something like that.
Yeah, we owe a great debt of gratitude to Brian Mulrooney.
Right.
So based on today's standards, he probably wouldn't have been my ideal conservative role model. Right. But you've got to give him credit. He took a rusty bucket of bolts that was left over from Pierre Trudeau and Jean Chrétien, his finance minister at the time. I remember he said, we left the cupboard bare. He didn't just leave the cupboard bare. He ripped the cupboard off the wall and left a gaping hole. I mean, this man, what he did to our economy was unconscionable. Brian Mulrooney was able to get us just almost into an operational balance, not quite a capital balance, but almost an operational balance. He, more than anyone, more than Chrétien afterwards, more than Paul Martin as his finance minister, he deserves the credit for having given us that economic underpinning that allowed us to have those good years in the 90s that the revisionist history liberals like to take credit for,
Right.
And it was actually Preston Manning who dragged the Liberals kicking and screaming into balancing those budgets. You got to remember, that guy ran in remember Liberal Red Book 1 and 2? He said he campaigned on zero deficit equals zero OPE, right? And how do you go from zero deficit equals zero OPE to, we've got to balance the books?
Well, and listen, we must have a lot more confidence even in Justin. When he got elected, he said the books will balance themselves, right? Now, one more time, his experience in business management would be...
I haven't looked at his resume, but I don't think he's got any.
No, but in his skill set, as a teacher, books will balance themselves, right? And then I think he promised balanced books within 3 years or something, right? But anyhow, bottom line, at the end of the day, promises made and not kept, right? And it's...
But they were vague promises at best. And I think, again, this is why we always get the government we deserve. What else did he say? Everyone remembers the budget will balance itself as a quote. But remember when they were talking about how to build an economy? And he said the same kind of absolute drivel that Mark Carney says. We'll build the economy from the heart outwards. Well, what does that mean? It's absolute nonsense, and it shouldn't have worked. It probably didn't work on a conservative like yourself, but to everyone else who was blown away by how fantastic his hair looked, that seemed like such an amazing answer, didn't it? But it's nebulous, and it's purposely nebulous. There's no substance there.
And, I'm trying so hard to sit in the middle, so call me a conservative. Gee, that's going to shoot me to the ground. But
Common sense.
yes, common sense. I like to look at all sides. But at the end of the day, Steve, I mean, you've seen your competitor in this writing say he's balanced the books 5 times, five budgets. So does that sound factual to you or what?
When you said my competitor, there's a few competitors, but I've been able to piece together what you're talking about. No, I mean, obviously it's not true. The interesting thing is he's talking about exactly what Mark Carney is proposing, which is separating the operational and the capital budget. And separating them as though they're two separate things. So it's ignoring what we call GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. And one ought not to do that. It's designed to obfuscate what's actually going on. It's designed to hide deficits. But ultimately, from your perspective, if this is time and this is total debt, and you're watching the total debt go like this, it doesn't matter how much blue smoke and mirrors you do. If you're not balancing the budget, you're not balancing the budget. So we've had a case for, we haven't balanced the budget in BC in probably over 15 years.
Yeah.
We have once out of 5 years, because you're talking about Mike DeYoung, he once out of 5 years balanced the operational side of the budget, but that was by rating ICBC and BC Hydro for $423 million, over $423 million. Never once balanced the capital budget, not once.
And of course, I've known Mike DeYoung for probably 35 years, and I like the man.
Mm-hmm.
But he came in as a liberal.
Mm-hmm.
And can liberals change their stripes?
Well, so of course, we had this scenario where there was really almost no Conservative Party to speak of. So a lot of people who were part of the BC Liberal Party like to say that they were the Free Enterprise Coalition. And that may have worked for a time, but if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, right, at some point, what was happening is they were paying lip service to Conservatives. They wanted the Conservatives' blood, sweat, and tears. They loved their volunteerism. They loved the money that they brought. They loved how much they helped out on campaigns. They didn't like any of their ideas, right?
You know, probably one of the biggest challenges I have in our entire country is, let's just say our youth are fairly accepting that buy it today, pay for it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I remember the day, and I'm going to say either somewhere around 1969, MasterCard pretty much gave everybody a $400 credit limit. And I saw what called the GNP or whatever is the whole country had a real boost in purchasing, right? And then to find out that so many will never pay off that debt. Mm-hmm. And I know I myself have added up $92,000 worth of interest on my Visa card, right? Over time, right? And holy crackers. And you miss 3 payments, it goes to 23, 24%. Mm-hmm. Like, holy crackers. So anyhow, at the end of the day, I just see an attitude of so many people, oh, no problem to borrow another $1 trillion and, you know, give me the spoils of that borrowing.
Yep.
And I don't care when we ever pay it back, mm-hmm. right?
That's a problem culturally for us in the West, predominantly. We used to value things like delayed gratification. You work hard in your youth, you develop the skills that you need. Over time, you're going to specialize, you're going to do better, you're going to get paid more. And eventually, you're going to be able to have that house and that car and everything else. What Pierre Poilievre has been calling the Canadian promise. And that's been broken over time, not just by subsequent governments, but also, as you say, by people's attitude shifting. And it's not just the people, it's the government's attitude shifting. So if we want to bring this back to, say, the provincial example that we were using, and not just provincial, but all levels of government, what do they want to talk about now? Rather than talking about total debt, they want to talk about debt to GDP ratio. And they repeat it like mantra. And what does that really mean? That's like saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, we might not have money, but I got this credit card. And it's got this like $40,000 limit on it. And you know what? We're only up to like $34,500 on it. So what's your problem? Let the good times roll, right? And what they're not looking at is that month after month after month, they're having to pay about $2,000 in debt servicing. Well, that's what we pay federally every year, $40 billion just in debt servicing. It's ridiculous.
You know, one of the very best ads I ever saw on a cover of a magazine, I think, believe it or not, it was called either Esquire or Vanity or something, was probably early 90s with Mike Harcourt had just won the provincial election. And they showed him in Bermuda shorts and a Hawaiian lay around him, you know, at the beach with the credit card, you know, the BC credit card going, let's boogie. In other words, unlimited spending, right? And we live in a world where our voters are used to instant gratification and almost zero responsibility for the future debt on the children and the grandchildren, right? And it's tough. And by the way, just speaking for myself, you know, I'm 72, but I was raised with the idea you want to buy a car, you actually save all the money and you buy the car. And then I was horrified to see, you know, within 10 years, everybody's just leasing their car. Like they don't actually own it. It's just a lease. I'm going, wow, that's a change in life, right? And so, yeah, you save, you buy, you know, you're not indebting yourself so much. In fact, what do I hear? The biggest reason for marital breakups is financial stress.
Yep.
Right? So
I would imagine
they should be teaching this in school. I think, in all seriousness, whatever they teach in schools, I wish there was some really strong economics, how to balance your checkbook. And that, in fact, I would say if you take a whole group of people under 30 and you said, if you just spent $4,000 on that big fancy 80-inch high definition TV screen, how much will it cost you on that Visa card over time? Like almost nobody can answer that question. But wouldn't it be nice if it says if you pay this off over the next 6 years, it will cost you $8,970.
See,
Right?
I believe that people have short memories because I hear this all the time that we don't teach this in school or we don't teach that in school. But you know what we do? We do actually teach math in school. And I know we're teaching that math is racist now or something, all these insane ideas on the left, the woke. But the fact is, we do still teach basic math. And we always did have word problems like that. I think what's changed in society is we've allowed these kids to say, when am I ever going to use something like that? And we had parents who said that it was okay if you don't do quite as well at math. You know, some people are just better at this and that. Well, you know, the funny thing is, we all get better at what we practice. And what we shouldn't have done is allowed kids to become comfortable with, I'm just not that good at math. Then work at it. Because the fact is, those principles haven't changed. Our culture has changed. We've allowed people to be increasingly more lazy, and we've allowed people to increasingly get away from, again, that which made us what we were, delayed gratification. If you can't afford the car, you can't afford the car, you know?
Anyhow, so Steve, so we probably got off budget a little bit, but the whole concept here is people to get to know who you are more. You know, you were born as a single parent family and you were raised in the ghetto and you lived in a school bus. Correct me on that.
Mother and father. My mom was a school teacher. She put her professional career on hold when she had us as kids. I have an oldest sister, an older brother, and then me. My father was an oil and gas engineer and worked all his life doing oil and gas flow control meter software. How's that?
Oh, wow.
Yep.
And you got raised in South Calgary, South, or whatever that is? Or?
Yeah, Chinook Park. Actually, Pierre and I went to the same high school. We shouldn't have, but that's a funny story. I can tell you off camera.
Wow. Yeah, very good, very good.
Yep.
Well, there you go. Well, listen, I think I speak for many Canadians is that when our debt has gone up to roughly $1.2 trillion, and I'm a math guy, I really, really love math, but I calculate out that turns out to be a 23.5% inflation rate. So instead of a dollar equal to a dollar, it should bring us down to 72.5 cents, right? or whatever that is. And then right now we're getting hammered on our dollar again. It just makes everything more expensive, right? So I liken to this a little bit. Let's say you own a home in Abbotsford and it's worth $1 million, and you can't make the mortgage payment this month. So why don't you borrow another million? Okay, now you got an extra $1 million worth of cash. So you and the family can go out for dinner every night, and you can order the biggest steak you want at the keg all the time. And a year from now, you're out again. So you just borrow another couple of $1 million. Well, the unsustainable part is your home is only worth $1 million. A $5 million mortgage on it may feel good, but it's not sustainable, right?
Well, first of all, I'd love to know where you're borrowing your money from, because I don't know anyone who'd do that.
Well, no, the government can borrow. They can print the money
government
as soon as they're voted in.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, we can't borrow that kind of money.
No,
and the value isn't in the house either. It's in the land, of course. But yeah, to your point, yes, people are over leveraged way too much in this country. Yeah. There's no question.
And I cycle that right back to our governance of our country. It's like, holy crackers, guy. Justin discovered the printing machine, right? He just turns the handle and pumps out a whole bunch of money.
It's even worse because we don't even need to create physical cash.
Right.
They can literally just create digital cash and have that go out in the form of, you've got a whole bunch of cheap credit on the market. That's great. But you've actually increased the money supply, thereby devaluing everything that you own and devaluing what's in your bank account if you're lucky enough to have anything there, right? Yeah. That's the danger of increasing the money supply. The great thing that has been going on for the past few years is Pierre Poilievre has been out there talking about what people said couldn't be done before. He's literally quoting Chicago School of Economics chapter and verse and educating people on why it is that we can't afford things. He's talking about powerful paychecks. Well, it's true. You used to have a relatively more powerful paycheck than now. And it's because of things like increasing the money supply or Justin and Mark Carney turning on the printing presses. It's unconscionable what they're doing and that we're allowing them to get away with it, right? And what we're not doing enough of is manufacturing things in this country. Because we long ago went away in the 70s from the gold standard. We have nothing backing our currency. We have a fiat currency, which means we need to produce more and we need to export more of that out of our country. And until we can start incentivizing our manufacturing sector to get busy, we're going to be in trouble in this country. It's why I've been proposing a couple of different things. One is I would like to see a tax holiday, if at all possible, with the proviso that everyone reinvest all of the savings that they realize back into their own companies so they can be competitive on a global scale. Now, I admit there's a couple of rough edges that would have to be worked out, but it's something I'd love to propose. Something that's eminently doable right now is we could work on the CCA, the capital cost allowance, and allow people, rather than 20% per year, be able to realize 100% of your capital expenditures in year one, so that people can start investing in the equipment that they need to produce the goods so they can sell them. That's what Canada needs a lot more of immediately.
I don't at all appear to be learned on this, but from what I understand is, let's just say you're an investor in Canada, you have some capital. Right now, a lot of that capital, like $500 billion in the last maybe 5 years and maybe $1 trillion over the last 10 years, has left Canada for the States.
Yep.
So if you go and build homes in the States, don't quote me, but your tax rate might be closer to 15%. Does that sound right? And I just learned this for the first time in the last 3 weeks, is the 1030 exchange program allows you, if you sell your development for 10 million, you can roll it over into another development for 10 million within 90 days with zero taxes.
We're talking about in the States.
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm going, in Canada, our investors, our builders, our developers are just penalized so badly.
Of course.
They're flooding to Texas or flooding to Florida and just taking all their cash with them.
And so this is the part of the problem. So during COVID, a lot of my business, I've spent the last 20, and this is my 29th year in Langley now, but I was spending an increasing amount of time in Abbotsford. And I was counseling people. A couple of my friends, they absolutely pulled up stakes and they moved to the States. A couple others I convinced to be able to stay up here. Now, I would want what's best for them overall, but you're describing capital flight. And that's the most dangerous thing, is those who have the greatest means, the greatest motility, they're the ones who are going to be the first to leave. And the problem is when that capital flight occurs, they're taking that money and they've reinvested it somewhere else. It doesn't immediately come back just because we elect Pierre Poilievre. We need to elect Pierre, and we need such a majority that people can actually trust that things are going to be sound up here economically for the foreseeable future. As I say as management consultant, businesses thrive on predictability. So just like Harper before him, Pierre Poilievre is going to have to send the right signals to the market, and that's through regulatory changes, just a whole bunch of different things, so that we can convince people once they get their investment back out to dare coming north of the 49th again. That's the thing. That trust is easily lost and it's hard won, right?
Well, I know here in BC, and listen, this is by my memory. I'm not saying I remember everything perfectly, but we had a very large mine in outside of Smithers. Don't quote me. They invested $4 billion into it, and when the NDP got in, they canceled it. Now that reverberated throughout the entire world, and to me, that stopped all mines from trying to open up in BC for 25 years. So the damage that's done with a hard policy on businessmen takes years to recover, right? You know, that confidence level again. But you chase the money out of the country, boy, we get hurt.
Yeah, one of the best examples of that, there was a brilliant lady, Catherine McMillan. She used to run this blog called Small Dead Animals. I don't know if you've ever read it. She used to have these recurring themes, and one of them was the Alberta and Saskatchewan border side by side. And her recurring headline was "Nature Can Be So Cruel." And it was describing all the pipeline and all the resource development on the Alberta side of the border and whoosh, right down the center, and then it all just dead ended. As though, oh man, can you believe it? All the resource riches are on one side, right? And of course, you had Lauren Calvert on the one hand, and we had the PC party in Alberta on the other hand. And suddenly Brad Wall gets in there, and wouldn't you know, they've rediscovered the fact that they have natural resources there that they can exploit properly, right? For the benefit of all Saskatchewan people. And look at them now, right? It's insane. That, once again, the result of good and bad government policy.
I don't know if do you really feel the French language is a big issue or even worth bringing up?
Do you mean nationally or on a local level?
As you get elected to Parliament, your French abilities are how strong?
Well, I mean, I took French immersion growing up. You're asking me if I can speak French?
Yeah. Are you?
C'est depuis longtemps que j'ai utilisé mon français, mais je peux absolument.
Would you say your confidence level in your linguistic strength in French is 5% or 25%?
No, it's much greater than that. I haven't had reason to use it.
Okay.
I had a national tech company. We worked for a few weeks in Laval a long time ago. Since then, you know, maybe going to Quebec City for our last convention, there just aren't that many opportunities to use
it. I don't, unless you're planning to be the prime minister one day, I don't think it's such a strong need. Right?
It's not that. It's that there's this whole idea. So I'm old enough to remember when MTV or Much Music in Canada came up. The first song that MTV played was, you remember, "A Video Killed the Radio Star." Okay, so it used to be that you could be really ugly, but you could sing really well, and you'd do all right in music. Ever since videos, well, now you've got to be telegenic as well, right? So the thing is, you used to be able to get away with being unilingual. I can barely even say it. The problem is now they want all ministers in question period to be bilingual, so you can answer and respond to whatever questions in either language. They also want now parliamentary secretaries, which used to be called assistant ministers or whatever they called them, right? They now need to be able to answer instead of the minister if he or she is not around. So they also want them to be bilingual. Is it useful? Yeah, I imagine it's useful.
So here's a more pointed question. Steve,
Mhm.
what ministry, if was offered to you, do you feel your skill are and your passion is? Pick a ministry.
We really don't get to. Under Harper, the surest way to ensure that you would never get any ministry portfolio was to ask for it. Look, if you were asking about my dream, a lot of times as kids, hey, you want to be prime minister? I have never in my wildest fantasies ever wanted to be prime minister. If I ever had a dream position, it would be foreign affairs. Are there other people vastly more qualified than me? Of course there are. I'm not suggesting that. I would love to be able to work in that department if given the option. But the fact is, everyone's going to have to earn any kind of position they get. And quite frankly, I'm not motivated by, how far can my star rise? I'm not interested in that. I am interested in advancing conservatism, knowing what I believe in here and up here, and having it come out of there. If I can advance conservatism, I'm plenty happy. And if Pierre decides that I'm useful in one area or another, I'm happy to take on whatever role.
Okay, well, that's good. Okay, so what would you say are well, actually, here's a key question for you. Do you think the Conservative Party is going to allow free votes at all?
Free votes, usually when someone mentions that, you're talking about in the context of like social issues.
There's going to be a new tax on all the dairy farmers in Abbotsford, and you're the one of the 5 ridings in Canada that's going to get slammed to the ground. Do you get to have an opinion on that, or you have to toe the party line that all dairy farmers are getting a new carbon tax?
Yeah, look, within party politics, there's always going to be a certain amount of whipping of the vote. I don't doubt that happens in all parties. They used to have within the BC Liberal Party provincially here what they called the rule of no surprises. In other words, they wanted you to be able to vote your conscience, but they wanted to know ahead of time behind closed caucus doors how you intended to vote so that they wouldn't get surprised out there on the floor. I have to imagine that other than what we all as candidates or as nomination contestants and anyone who wins their candidacy, you have to sign a piece of paper saying that you are going to abide by what's in the policy book and what your leaders decided. I've had to sign off on that as well. I think that what we have is the ability behind closed caucus doors, where you're following a proper chain of command, quietly but passionately. I believe you're allowed to make your case to your leader for why you think this or that might not be the best approach. I think that's respectful. I think there's probably going to be discussions like that at some point. But at some point, once you're done and the leader's made his decision, you've got to go out as a united force.
No, I can understand that. Listen, we've seen policies, especially in BC, but I'm surprised at how often people vote for a member of parliament to represent their riding. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they're going, you didn't vote for us once. Mm-hmm. Like all of your votes were what the leader wanted, right? Mm-hmm. And so where's the representation, right? And to me, there's a flaw there.
Yeah,
right?
I think every member of parliament is going to have to straddle a bit of a line where you're always trying to solicit information and feedback from the electorate in your riding. You want to know how best to service them and serve them and represent their needs, their wants, their desires in Ottawa. They need to provide you with the rhetorical ammunition so that you can say, this is what the constituents want in Abbotsford, South Langley. So we do our best, I believe, as members of parliament to accurately and fairly represent them, right? And we make those arguments, again, I believe, behind closed caucus doors and try and advocate as best we can. Then we come back and communicate as best we can to our constituents.
If there's just, we ask why people are disenfranchised from voting. 50% of the people aren't going to vote in this next election. And why is that? Well, if they vote for someone, but they never hear from them again, and they never vote for their needs, then that's a real disenfranchise, or that's a real discouragement, right? So to me, that is a problem, right?
I think generally people are sick and tired of hearing what they believe to be these pat political answers to everything. Anyone who's ever been a part of a political party long enough has gotten used to getting The letters in the mail, always looking for cash, right? Everything's bold-faced, italicized, underlined, everything's an emergency, and the answer is always, if you just give us more cash. I think people are sick and tired of that kind of politics, and they're sick and tired of half answers, mealy-mouthed answers. And I think when you can actually speak to people, and you can only do it when you're, first of all, listening to what the issues are, that's when they get animated and they're willing to come out and vote. And I think you have to not only establish that trust as a new member of parliament, but you've got to continuously work on it throughout your entire career.
You know, we have a really good opportunity to bring in a guest speaker. He actually hasn't voted yet.
Hasn't voted.
It's your job to convince him why he should. So
okay.
Why don't you join us here? Pull up one of the chairs. You might as well stick in the middle. So Isaac, you're only 16. You get to vote in what, 18? Is that right?
Yep.
But you've had the good luxury to interview Andrew Scheer, that was running for the federal government to be prime minister at one point. And you got exposed to the first political answer. What did you ask him?
Who's better, Batman or Superman?
And what was his answer?
Well, they're both good for different reasons, and
in other words, he gave you a completely non-answer political answer, right?
Yeah.
Well, the risk factor was horrible. If he would have picked Superman, he would have lost his nomination. They would be fried in the media, and he could never ever say Superman's better. Is that the deal?
Mm-hmm.
Good gosh. But anyhow, at the end of the day, Isaac, we're just talking about true representation. And half of the people out there don't vote. And as I talk to them, and I say, won't make any difference, right? And do you have an answer to these people?
Yeah. If you looked at all the people who said it won't make any difference, and they all got together and they all voted, no matter which way they wanted to vote, they would absolutely change the electoral landscape. I mean, the Green Party could get elected in a landslide if everyone went who said we won't make a difference, and they decided to all vote Green. Green Party would get in.
You know, and I'm going to speak to bribery here, okay?
Why are you pointing to me while you say that?
But anyhow, in this province, David Eby said everybody gets $1,000 if you vote for the NDP. Cash check. Now,
he said that before the election, to be clear.
Yeah, right. Before the election. And then the other guy,
Rustad?
John Rustad said you get $3,500 after you file your taxes and down the road a bit. Well, on the instant gratification side, you know, a lot of people would say, I want the $1,000 now. It'll arrive in 4 weeks, right? And I truly say that would have earned him at least 5% of the vote, if not 15. And I've studied this a lot, by the way. That's a good bribe of $1,000. Now, what very few people understand is if somebody gives you from the government, gives you $1,000, they've actually taken $2,000 out of your wallet or your purse. So it's your money they're giving back to you. But not many people understand that. But it won the election. And then, of course, he's negated on that promise because now he says, oh, we got Trump tariffs and we're starting a Trump war. So, you know, we can't fulfill that promise anymore, right? But it would have made a difference in the election, right? So broke bribery. So Isaac, will you succumb to that? To that, you know, some government says they're going to give you a new car or something if you vote for them, and you're going to just vote for them? Why should he vote?
We're talking federal again.
Federal.
Federally? Because it's your future. So my kids are 8 and 10. They're about to be 9 and 11 in April. And they owe tens of thousands of dollars federally and provincially. I don't remember exactly what their total is right now. They probably owe something like $38,000 federally and probably north of $18,000 provincially. Before anything else, they have to pay all of that money, right? And so if you had a credit card and you had that much racked up on it, you would be paying a couple of $1,000s a month just on debt servicing costs. The reason why you can't afford things, house, car, whatever it is because of what we have already gone and done and spent. I use the corporate we, right? All of that spending that was done before you were born. The reason you should care is because you should want to put the brakes on the spending that we are currently doing. And again, I use the corporate we, but we're actually the good guys that are trying to put the brakes on that spending. That's part of why you should care. We are essentially stealing your future from you, and we're calling it a right, which is the most disgusting thing that can happen, quite frankly. I think it should be unconscionable for every parent to carry on doing what we're doing, knowing the future that we're robbing our children of.
Now, by the way, I love math, and I have calculated our total debts for our federal, our provincial, and even looking at some of our municipal. But all of those debts on the taxpayer, the full-time employed taxpayer in Canada, and I come up with about $250,000 worth of debt. So maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but even if it's half of that, it is a horrible burden. So when people go to university and they rack up a $60,000 debt on student loans, I run into so many that haven't even been able to pay it off 20, 30 years later. So to have a $250,000 debt is getting unsustainable here. This is like crazy time.
Well, isn't that what the government's there for, to pay off the student loan debts?
Oh, there's a good. Are you going to support that bill to pay off all the student loans for Canadian students?
Definitely not. And part of the problem is it's actually the government's fault that tuition costs as much as it does. I don't know if you're aware of this. When I started university in '93 at the University of Calgary, the two levels, provincial and federal government, they were paying for north of 81% of all the tuition fees. Right now we're down somewhere between 55 and about 63, 64%. But still, government is paying, the taxpayers are paying more to subsidize your education than your tuition is. That's why your profs get paid as much as they do. And that's why your education costs as much as it does. And that's why your student loans are as much as they are. It's because of government paying the tuition. If people couldn't afford the tuition, then you're back to supply and demand. And guess what? If students can't afford tuition, then I guess you got to lower your tuition rates. But they've never been incentivized to, because the government says, don't worry, we'll cover that. And the government says to you, don't worry, we'll cover your student loans to a certain extent. And then you finish off, and what do you find? Government's not there. Government never cared about you in the first place. Government cared about reliable leftist votes from reliable leftist institutions charging you way too much for mostly useless degrees.
You know, I tease, you know, I try to have a balanced group of friends, but on the artsy side, I always tease them. So you went and you got a master's degree in art. Okay, so do you know the primary colors now, like blue, red, yellow? Okay, that's good. And is there any jobs for your skill set?
That's the most important thing.
So, boy, don't we wish, and I don't know what they're doing, you're in high school now, but theoretically, you know, really good career studies to show we need drywallers, we need plumbers, we need engineers, we need RCMP or whatever it might be, to show the opportunities out there and what education it gets to do there. And I kind of wish that there was more for the schools to actually have the students spend like a full month in practicum during their high school years to actually get their feet wet, right? And it just seems to be, we're getting lost here. We just have an entire generation right now that, you know, wants to walk their dog as the better lifestyle, and absolving all responsibility of, you know, being well-being to the government will now look after me, right? And, you know, we'll call it the socialist way, right? There's free money on a tree somewhere in Ottawa, and you just pick it and you give it to all the people, right? Right? But it's a trend I honestly see myself. So, Isaac, I think what he's trying to say is that whatever the governments have built up on debt, it's your money. And I think you need to call people like this to task to say, don't spend over the budget. I do not, you're the boss, he's the servant, and you seriously are voting him in, and he should honor the wishes of the people, other than the many people that would say, oh, borrow all the money you can. He has to have a level of accountability. But yeah, I would say if you promised everybody $2,000 to vote for you for the Conservative Party would win. But that's bribery.
Also, the government has no money. Only the taxpayers have money. So like Ronald Reagan said famously, government doesn't tax for the money it needs. It always needs every penny it gets in taxes. And that's why it's incumbent on us to shut off the tap and starve government of money, quite frankly. It's what they need to do. They need to go on a very, very serious diet. And if government slipped away for a couple of weeks, as Reagan also said, we likely wouldn't miss them very much, because government is the problem. They're not the solution, right? So yeah, we do need to starve the government of a lot of more money. You need to retain a lot more money in your pockets. I don't know if you've started working. Do you have any part-time job?
Yeah, I dishwash sometimes.
Yeah, excellent. It's humble work, right? But it's still paying something. But you're now starting to see all the taxes that are being taken off, right? How come you don't get to keep as much of your taxes? How come you don't get to keep as much of your wage, right? And it's all to pay for things that you may not have wanted in the first place, right? So the government, a long time ago, has a contract, let's say, with people. And it's supposed to be there so that it gives us the basics. What do we want out of government? Well, I think we want a common currency. You know, it used to be that you had a Bank of Vancouver and you might have a Bank of Montreal. You know, it's not just a brand name. There used to be banks for every city, and each city would have its own currency. Well, we decided we don't want that as a nation. We want a common national currency. We want a standing army. We might want some paramilitary organizations like the RCMP. But with each successive thing that we're looking for, a lot of us said, well, we never signed up for that. We wanted the basics, but we wanted to be left the heck alone, right? And yet the government, what we call the nanny state, extending its bony fingers into your life, saying, no, you need UI, you need EI, or you need whatever else it is, cradle to grave benefits. But you may not have wanted that, right? That's what your taxes are paying for, like it or not.
So as we interview Steve here, you're going to find we talk a little bit about where he grew up, how he got to know Preston Manning, or even went to high school with Pierre and Stephen Harper, and all of that grounding. Then we'll talk a lot a bit on his opinion on managing businesses and managing government and not overspending and balancing budgets. And we even get to have a guest speaker that is a young non-voter at this point, but how do we motivate half of the population to feel empowered to make a difference and not just sort of they're a slave to society and nothing they will do will make a difference, right? So their vote counts, but it should be an informed vote. You know, somebody I know very closely said they voted for Justin at the beginning because he does good selfies with panda bears. So that's not an informed vote. An informed vote is to say, don't spend more money than the budget is. Do not borrow money in my name on my Visa card, and don't put me in debt for my life and my children's life and my grandchildren's life, right? So as you listen through this video, we really had a lot of fun.
So I did enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I thank you for actually taking the initiative that so much of the media out here will not. And they refuse to educate people on what I think is one of the most consequential races going on for South Abbotsford, for South Langley, for the foreseeable future. You know, the next 12 to 18 years, we could have a representative in Ottawa who doesn't reflect any of what we stand for or believe in. And what I've heard repeatedly from the media, from the black press especially, is that, well, people don't really care. And yet people care about what they decide to talk about. So thank you for drawing some attention to the race.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve, for coming out.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay.